much for your inspiring words, Ms. Campbell. We will now hear from some of the honorable members here today. Comme il est d'habitude à la Chambre.
As usual in the House of Commons, we will refer to members by the name of their riding.
Déclaration des députés. The honorable member for Churchill-Coatinegaski. The honorable member for Churchill-Coatinegaski.
Hi everyone. Kanse Anin Bojo. My name is Kaylee Arthurson. I am Naheya Na, Anishinaabe, Two-Spirit, and from the Fish River Cree Nation in Manitoba, Treaty 5. I acknowledge that we are on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin. I want to speak about the injustices that my people face, environmental justice, and the systematic racism embedded in colonial institutions. I want Canada to stop its genocide inflicted upon my people. I want the poverty and meth crisis to be addressed in Winnipeg and in other cities. I want the cleaning and long-term sustainability of our lakes. I want something to be done about the human trafficking, addictions, the child welfare system, the high suicide and incarceration rates within Aboriginal people, because we are extremely vulnerable and targeted. I want there to be more economic development, food and water security, health and mental health services in First Nation communities, especially those of isolation. I want cultural and language revitalization for my people. I want Canada to stop extracting fossil fuels from our traditional lands that they colonized. This can be done by passing Bill C-262 pertaining to the implementation of UNDRIP. And I stand with the women who are excluded and forcibly removed from colonial spaces. Ekosana.
Order. For future reference, it is completely okay if you remain in your seat, but we would love for you to stand. Next, we have the honorable member from Nickel Belt.
Ovanga Daktu, my name is Sabrina. I will be representing Nunavut. I never saw myself becoming successful, educated, and proud of my Inuit heritage. I also never saw myself living past the age of 20, due to a constant feeling throughout my life to make the impulsive decision to commit suicide. Like many Inuit, I struggle with the impact of intergenerational trauma as a result of the actions of the Canadian government to extinguish our culture, language, and families. Suicide is preventable. We need trauma healing centers in all of our communities. We need Inuit to be trained in mental health care so we can identify our traumas in our Inuktitut language. The healing must take place without removing Inuit from our homes and communities. We deserve so much more than what is accessible to us. In order to protect us, we need to declare this a state of emergency amongst Canadians. I don't want to witness another day to see someone in my life choose to end their own. I'm tired of living among constant devastation. We need action now.
Okay. L'honorable député de Hunt-Cartierville.
The honourable member for Cartierville. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, rather. Our democratic institutions represent the interests of all Canadians. Unfortunately, a certain part of the population, including religious women and trans women, feel that they are rejected by the political class and civil society, specifically by certain individuals who really want to exclude them from society. And this exclusion has a direct impact that, on the impression that people have about their society. Because when people feel that they're excluded, well, it's easy to act in a way that implies that you feel excluded. So we need to ensure that public spaces are accessible, and we need to raise awareness. We must protect the rights of Canadian women, their basic rights and freedoms. Everywhere, wherever we are in the country, we must be protected. Respecting our fundamental values and individuals' rights and freedoms is part of our Canadian heritage and our identity. We should never derogate from this principle.
Allowed. Merci.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the words of Malala Yousafzai, we cannot all succeed when half of us are held back. Today, we stand 338 women strong in the House of Commons. However, tomorrow, only 88 women will represent 50% of the population. Women, especially women of color, are held back and face institutional and societal barriers that continue to hold up white men as a standard, contributing to the erasure of women in politics. Equal representation is important to me because when I see a woman in politics as a politician in a male-dominated field, I think to myself, it's safe, it's possible, it's achievable. My success is not predetermined by my characteristics that I cannot control. It is determined. It is determined by my skills, my qualifications, and my ambitions. I want to thank women in politics for your courage, strength, and endurance in being a champion for the 50% of the population that is underrepresented in politics. To all women of color in politics who inspire me to surmount these barriers and excel in what would seem unimaginable to do, thank you.
Just so that you are aware, there is a water station at the back of the house if you need to grab a drink of water. And now, the honourable member for Oshawa.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to bring forward the issue of our job market in our great country. My hometown of Oshawa has recently been affected by the announcement of the close of the General Motors plant. This plant has employed thousands of Canadians over 100 years. I am a third-generation employee at the General Motors plant, and I stand on the shoulders of my grandfather and my father before me, all who have depended on GM as a source of income. Madam Speaker, investment is fleeing our country in record amounts, and the jobs of Canadians suffer on the account of investment leaving our country. Whether it's my sisters in Alberta, who have witnessed the loss of 100,000 jobs, or whether it's my sisters in Ontario, who have witnessed the automotive and manufacturing sector leave for more competitive jurisdictions. We can all agree that we need to do better as a country to keep the future jobs here at home. And with General Motors being one of the top employers for gender equality, we can all agree that we need these opportunities not only to sustain a living for our families and ourselves, but also to be able to participate equally and grow in our economy.
L'honorable député de Beaulay-Chambly.
The honourable member for Beaulay-Chambly.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Determination, young folks around the world and in this country are holding decision makers accountable for human-induced climate change. Canada is warming up twice as fast as the global average, and the continued failure of our policymakers to actually address this is deeply disturbing. If everything is political during an election year, what is there less polarizing than our ability to sustain a safe life for everyone?
In Canada, this struggle is particularly important because all of this exploitation of our resources is being done without the consent of our Indigenous peoples, who have always fought to protect our earth and our air and waters. We must act, even if we need to make major compromises. If you were on board a bus which was moving directly towards a cliff, you would brake. At least I hope so. You wouldn't be worrying about the state of the brakes or the rest of the bus after braking. You would immediately act. So I would ask politicians to be daring enough to act, to do more than what is immediately politically useful, and to act.
The honourable member for Surrey Moose Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In 2015, I was thrilled to finally have the opportunity to vote in my first federal election. However, I made the difficult decision to vote strategically rather than with my heart. Our now Prime Minister promised that 2015 would be the last election using first past the post, but his government has abandoned that. Young Canadians are cynical about politics because it feels like we can't make a difference. It feels like we are wasting a vote if we vote for an awesome fringe candidate, or we're worried about splitting the vote because the first past the post system only recognizes the majority winner. Young Canadians want a new, dynamic way to engage with democracy. We want voter reform.
The honourable member for Labrador.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mental illness affects all Canadians in one way or another. You may have a friend, colleague, or family member who suffers from mental illness, or you yourself may have suffered with poor mental health. Statistically, by age 40, 50% of Canadians will have had a mental illness. Being born and raised in Labrador, I've seen firsthand the impact mental illness can have on individuals and on a community. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death in our nation and is heavily prevalent in my riding. If we do not provide the supports and resources that mental health requires, we will see the deaths of our future leaders before our eyes. Mental health resources are needed nationwide and particularly in the isolated communities of Labrador. Mental illness does not wait. Mental illness does not wait for you to reach the top of the wait list. People are dying while waiting to receive the help they deserve. We may not all have mental illness, but we all have mental health, and it is time we address it.
L'honorable député de Louis-Hébert.
The honourable member for Louis-Hébert.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In November 2018, we had the chance to get the $10 bills of the first Black Canadian woman, Bella. A grad activist in Nova Scotia, but this is not enough. We need more than $10 to get a better inclusion because Black women are still facing many issues today. En tant qu'Afro-Québécoise, j'ai vécu des situations.
As a Quebec woman, I've been through difficult situations. I've been followed in a store because people thought that I was going to shoplift. And I know that my Black brothers are often bothered by police.
My voice today, but the voice of all Black women is as important as any other voice in my province across the country. Our history has been hidden, and it's time that we learn it in order to have a greater representation in every way. We will continue to support each other, we're empowering and lead one another. There's no limit of what Black women can accomplish.
The Honourable Member for University Rosedale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In 2015, it was estimated that there were at least 1,181 Indigenous women and girls in Canada known to either have been missing or murdered. 1,181. If you remember anything from the next 1 minute, remember that number. Remember that that number is high enough to fill every seat in this room 3 times over. Remember that Indigenous women make up only 2% of the female population in Canada, but make up about 1/4 of all female homicide victims. Remember that the kin of the victims called the inquiry into their disappearances and deaths of their loved ones inaccessible, re-traumatizing, and a waste. Remember that that number is not a number, that that is our mothers, our aunties, our sisters, our friends, and our daughters. And remember that Canada is responsible for our loss of them, and that it still fails to deliver them justice. 1,181.
L'Honorable Député de Saint-Maurice.
Member for Saint-Maurice Champlain.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Since I was born, intellectual aspect has been part of my life. Over the years, I have seen inequalities for these people because I have doors that open before me and not for others. This is not unique to me. Dear colleagues, you know that 22% of Canadians have incapacities. And they can't participate in political life. People that are disabled face many barriers. This is why I'm calling on the government to take action to harmonize these Canadian laws with the Convention for those disabled people under the UN. This act should be part of a global picture. We need to take action. Diversity is our strength, but our society would be stronger if we were more inclusive. We need to change perceptions and respect these people that live with disabilities, and we need to raise awareness and rethink our system so that no one is left behind.
The Honourable Member for Regina Capel.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Canadian agriculture is leading the way in technology and innovation that is helping achieve food security around the globe. However, Canadian farmers are struggling every day with international trade disputes, transportation issues, and environmental policies. I'm a third-generation grain and cattle farmer from Saskatchewan. These policies have a direct effect on my family's business as well as all other Canadian farming families.
Canadian farmers need efficient transportation policies to get our products to market, and they need to be recognized for their sustainable agriculture practices. Canadian farmers need the government to promote the quality of Canadian products on a global stage, and they need the government to secure existing markets and seek out new international markets. Canadian farmers are supporting local rural communities and feeding the world. So I ask all of you to stand up for farmers and agriculture policies that ensure Canadian farmers have access to all the modern tools and technologies so they can sustainably produce abundant, healthy, affordable, and safe food for all of our tables. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Desnatay, Missinippi, Churchill River.
My name is Caitlin Bird. I grew up in an Indian reservation. I grew up in Montreal Lake, Saskatchewan. And there has been an unknown number of Indigenous children who have died because of the Canadian government. Lack of care, residential school, cultural genocide, the Indian Act, colonialism. Indigenous children deserve better. We deserve to be treated. We deserve to be in this room. Tina Fontaine deserved to be in this room. The 3,000 Indigenous children who are estimated to have died in residential school deserve to be here. Colton Bushi deserves to be alive. We deserve justice for every Indigenous youth who has died, who will die, and who can, thank you.
L'honorable député.
Member for Argentou, La Petite Nation.
The Canadian population is estimated to be over 1.2 million people, yet specific data about the unique struggles which our community faces remain extremely scarce. That is why I come to this floor with one specific policy request. I demand that the intentional and mandatory disaggregation of race in data collection analysis across government institutions. As an effort to better support initiatives within our communities, as an effort to remain committed to the UN Decade for People of African Descent, as an effort to render visible the histories and realities of racial discrimination, we must acknowledge the saliency of race in people's livelihoods. The umbrella concept of visible minority does not work as it erases the very diverse experiences of Black Canadians. And more broadly, racialized Canadians who are no longer a minority. Disaggregated data is a stepping stone towards the dismantlement of systemic racism in this country, and I urge you all to join me in this battle.
The Honourable Member for Cariboo, Prince George.
Assalamu alaikum, Madam Speaker. Being of Syrian descent, I'd like to thank the Canadian government for helping bring over 40,000 Syrian refugees to Canada. Yet, despite this, I still see many newcomers in my community struggling and needing support. And when I say support, not only do I mean educational and employment, but community and social support. Like us, they want freedom, security, and opportunity. They want to be a part of this country. Yet across this nation, problems like racism and Islamophobia persist, and nobody should be afraid to worship and believe as they wish. Muslim women should not be prevented to work because of their hijab. And yet, as passionate as I am about immigrant and refugees and Islamophobia, we must not forget the people of this country. As I've witnessed in Prince George, which is known for its highway of tears, I have watched the Indigenous people mistreated, and I have seen how they are disproportionately represented in the justice system, and it is time for this to be fixed. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Parry Sound Muskoka.
Thank you to the organizers for this opportunity to speak. I would like to recognize nurses and PSWs, personal support workers, for the care they give our elders in long-term care homes. They are working as hard as they can. There isn't enough staff to provide the quality care that our elders deserve. It shouldn't be acceptable to have only 2 PSWs caring for more than 30 people at a time. But this is the norm. As an employee of long-term care, I'm here to tell you that this is not humane. Our residents are people, elders who deserve better than a conveyor belt approach to caregiving. Where politicians see a budget, I see a grandmother or a son who deserves dignity and quality of life. By 2030, the population of people over 65 will increase by 30%. This is a crisis. We are not talking about statistics. We are talking about our family. We are talking about ourselves. Long-term care needs more funding. More caregivers need to be hired. It's up to you.
L'honorable député.
Member for Montmagny-Liselay, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Thank you, Madam Speaker. What world do we want to leave to our future generations? Well, for me, I sincerely want to give a society where everyone is valued. And that would only be possible if we reform our election system. That it is sexist, this system. Women and Indigenous women have never been represented properly, proportionally, according to demographics. And even 26% of these seats have been held by women in 2015. Well, this is not this equality. Well, Madam Speaker, there's no doubt that the election system does not work. How is it representing democracy? How is it possible that there haven't been that many women? This is exactly what happened in 1975, 65. Madam Chair, does this really truly represent equality?
The Honourable Member for Cardigan.
Madam Speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to speak on the historic Bill C-81, the act to ensure a barrier-free Canada. This groundbreaking piece of legislation led by Minister Quattro will identify and break down discriminatory barriers Canadians with disabilities have had to face for far too long. Bill C-81 will work to create a truly inclusive Canada so that our nation will be accessible for all, regardless of ability. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Timmins James Bay.
Dear Honourable Parliamentarians and fellow delegates, I am privileged to stand before you today on behalf of the Timmins James Bay riding to address the issue of homelessness in my community, a concern which has become increasingly visible yet progressively covert. Studies have indicated that cases of homelessness in my riding are unusually high compared to other places in Canada. Similarly, there is a troubling correlation between the hidden and covert forms of homelessness and racial and gendered forms of marginalization and vulnerability. As we know, there are significant implications related to homelessness, including poor mental and physical health stemming from inadequate diets and high levels of stress, and increased susceptibility to various forms of exploitation. Systemic issues relating to unemployment, the rising cost of housing, and a serious lack of equitable social assistance programs have collectively contributed to the issue of homelessness in my community and in Canada more generally. It is my objective to put this issue at the forefront of my riding's local agenda through increased awareness, community support, citizen involvement, and enhanced accessibility to better social services in collaboration with future and existing organizations. Thank you.
L'honorable député de
Member for Bécancour-Loris-Sorel. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very lucky to live in Canada when I can take advantage of many rights and freedoms.
University, where I studied human rights, but I question why I never learned more about them in public school. Learning one's own rights should not be a privilege. It is a right in itself. Having ratified the United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child, Canada has an international obligation to provide human rights education, which includes the fundamental principle of respect. Today, people in this country still lack the fulfillment of the basic rights to clean drinking water, to education, to security. La pollution causant les
Pollution that causes climate change will continue to jeopardize our health.
The inherent dignity of their fellow members of the human family, and there are those who cause terror in Canada and abroad. La discrimination est
Discrimination is everywhere in work, government, and schools.
Now more than ever. We can all do better, but only if we know better. Merci.
The Honourable Member for Waterloo.
Good morning. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak about something close to me. Services for children with autism have been in the news a lot lately, but today I'd like to talk about the lack of services for autistic adults. Autism is not a condition that disappears when a person turns 18, but rather is something an individual will face for their entire life. Autistic adults are chronically or underemployed, and support programs are underfunded, difficult to navigate, and include many systemic barriers. I myself have been attempting to navigate the system and have been unable to find adequate support, denying me the ability to move forward at the pace of my peers with confidence and dignity. I and every other autistic adult deserve to live a full life with dignity and respect. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Surrey Newton.
Today, as I represent my riding of Surrey-Newton, I would like to address the issue of gang violence within the city I live and work in. Due to the violence taking place, families have lost loved ones and our communities have been shaken. I am a Punjabi woman in a city with a large Punjabi community. There is a real issue present, one that cannot be fixed with labels or stereotypes. I would like to highlight the efforts undertaken by organizations within Surrey who work to empower the community, as well as the federal government, who has pledged $7.5 million for the Surrey Anti-Gang Family Empowerment Program. However, the fight is not over. This issue must continue to be addressed, and not just by those who reside in Surrey. This impacts us all.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Signal Hill.
Merci, Madame Speaker. Pour faire face...
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To face the challenges that are coming up in the future, we need creative and strong youth. My experience with the bilingual debate changed my life and allowed me to feel more confident in my fight against inequality. So, the bilingual debate has the potential to be a key to training our future female leaders, while giving better chances to people who are part of minority communities. So today, I would like to ask the Canadian government to invest resources in the debates program. And in debates program and oral expression programs for people from minorities, people from less well-off populations, new immigrants, and Indigenous populations, as well as others in both official languages of Canada. Debate should be used as a social tool, ladies and gentlemen, in order to give youth more power and eloquence. Let us together give a voice to those who are voiceless.
The Honourable Member for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan.
I have a disorder which claims the lives of 1 in 10 of those afflicted by it. My life-saving treatment plan costs $8,640 every year, and that figure does not include my prescription medication. Without this treatment, my chances of remission decrease substantially, while I inch closer to becoming yet another statistic. We pride ourselves on our universal health care system, and yet none of my treatment is covered under the Canada Health Act because mental health care does not fall within the scope of medically necessary treatment. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death in this country, yet Canadians still don't have access to a universal mental health care program. My life has an annual price tag of $8,640 because mental health care remains undervalued and underfunded in this country. Canadians deserve better than this. We deserve universal mental health care, and we cannot afford to wait any longer. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Peace River, Westlock.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you, Madam Speaker. Despite recent events and the current global political climate, I am honored to stand here to destroy the narrative that people of different colors, cultures, and religions cannot live amongst each other in unity and peace. My grandfather, a Lebanese immigrant, was able to do so decades ago, treating mink furs and establishing businesses alongside the Indigenous community, who we must recognize cared for this land and called it home well before any of us. Together, they welcomed newcomers, shared languages, cultural tokens, creating a micro-example of what Canada strives to be. I am a product of that community in Lac La Biche, Alberta, where I was supported in my growth as an academic an athlete, and a freely practicing Muslim Canadian. I am proof that the multicultural sense of community is alive and well in parts of Canada. But in order for this to persist, we must continue to encourage cross-cultural understanding and ethnic harmony. Do not forget the values that we embody as Canadian citizens and fall victim to the negative agenda of world leaders who breed hostility and seek to divide us based on our differences, because it is not our differences that make us weak. In fact, that is our biggest advantage as a nation. So support your brothers and sisters and fight against hate and forces that seek to divide our 37 million strong family. Thank you.
L'honorable député de Rosemont, la Petite Patrie.
The honourable member for Rosemont, la Petite Patrie.
Je suis reconnaissante.
I am very grateful to be able to speak for 1 minute today because I have the sense of never having been able to express myself in the Canadian political system. Even today in the 21st century, we still need to go out and demonstrate in the streets to be heard. I sometimes wonder if I really have a place in our society when women only represent 26% of our federal elected officials. Is there a real chance for First Nations, the first people to live on this earth? Is there a real place for religious and ethnic minorities? Is there a real place for the most vulnerable among us who don't have the tools to raise their voice in our society? Is there a real place for youth and for our future leaders who are never taken seriously when they express their fears about our degenerating world? We need to take our fair place in our society. We should adopt a proportional system. That's not enough, but it is necessary in order to put an end to cynicism and strategic voting. We need to build a pluralistic and welcoming political society, a collaborative one, in order to be able to face the true problems for our country and our time.
The honourable member for Halifax.
Salam, peace. I would like to start by acknowledging and thanking the Algonquin Anishinaabe for having us here today. It's been 1 year since Lucy Granados was forcefully deported to Guatemala from Montreal after being denied a permanent residency on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. Lucy was subjected to brutal force by border officers, and her story is not the only one. Migrants and refugees without criminal offenses are always in fear of the threat of detention and deportation for being what we call illegal. We must challenge this notion because no one can be illegal for simply existing. I urge the government to rescind the Safe Third Country Agreement, which encourages unsafe border crossing to seek protection. I also urge the government to grant permanent resident status to all migrants and refugees already here and to end their criminalization and discrimination, because no mother should have to be separated from their child. We must assert our humanity.
L'honorable député de Mirabel.
The honourable member for Mirabel. For many years, internship students in Quebec have been fighting to have their rights recognized. Almost 55,000 students do not receive an income or legal coverage for their internship work. As a woman, what personally affects me is that these unpaid internships are often in traditionally female fields like nursing, whereas in traditionally male fields, internships are paid.
Pourquoi donner ce privilège à certains?
Why pay some interns when others don't have that right? These unpaid internships also have a considerable impact on students' mental health. So I turn to you, young women and future politicians, to raise awareness about this issue. Even though the government of Quebec has been pressured to pay internships, so far no money's been put aside in the budget. Our society should be based on fundamental values like solidarity and fairness. We all deserve decent working conditions. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Miramichi, Grand Lake.
Madam Speaker, I am proud to stand here as a queer woman living with mental illness among such an amazing and diverse group of women and non-binary individuals. As a student at Mount Allison University, I have been lucky to work with a member from Beausejour here today on a Get Out the Vote campaign, which informs students about voting, which led to the election of Green Party MLA Megan Mitton by only 11 votes. None of this would have been possible without access to on-campus voting and nonpartisan campaigns, as the 11 votes that decided this election came from my campus. Beyond the funding of nonpartisan campaigns, an increase in voter turnout must come from electoral reform, which is why I am thrilled to be voting in the Prince Edward Island referendum on April 23rd to implement mixed-member proportional representation. By voting yes, PEI can become the first province to implement electoral reform, changing the way we vote and the government that we can see. As a young islander, this makes my vote matter. And this can move us away from a largely two-party system. And why does this matter? Because, Madam Speaker, these are the voices I want to see running my country.
The Honourable Member for Provencher.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Tanchi, Ani Dishnekashun, Wajusibish Doshchi. I would like to acknowledge that we are currently on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. More than 2/3 of approximately 70 Indigenous languages in Canada that are still spoken are endangered. Michif, my traditional language, has been labeled as extremely endangered, which most of its speakers being elders. Unfortunately, many years of colonization and government policies of assimilation have seriously impacted Métis people's ability to speak and to know their native tongue. If Michif was to disappear, we're not only losing a language, we would lose the knowledge and values that are at risk of being lost in translation. After years of searching, I finally found a Michif workshop which I attended last month. The feeling I had after even just hearing my language was truly amazing. I finally felt connected to my culture and felt proud to be Métis. My wish is that my relatives, and especially Métis youth, have a chance to experience a similar pride in their identity. As Canadians, we need to participate in political advocacy and support the work done by Indigenous peoples to preserve their languages. Merci.
I'd like to thank all of the members for their speeches.
We're back. If everyone could please take their seats. All right, order. Can everyone please take their seats? I now invite the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to address members.
What an incredible pleasure to see you all this morning. It's just so wonderful to see this chamber so filled with the future of this country right here. I'm going to keep my remarks very short here because I look very much forward to hearing as many questions as we can fit into this next half hour. I know there's a lot of issues on people's mind, but I want to address right off the top the fact that we've seen in the news over the past number of weeks a number of people with questions about disagreements within the Liberal Party. And I need to know and I need to tell you that this is part of what politics needs to be about. Hearing different voices, listening, learning from each other, growing together and figuring out a path forward. And it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be simple, and quite frankly, it's never going to be obvious what is the right path or how to do things. We always have to keep true to our values, true to our approaches, and try and figure out the best way forward as we move forward in a respectful, responsible way. There is never going to be an absolute one side or another. There are always going to be multiple voices we have to listen to. And one of the things that we have in an occasion like this to gather from every corner of the country like this is an opportunity to listen to each other, an opportunity to ask each other questions, and an opportunity to figure out the path forward. I know nobody in here wants to have to pick who to believe between Jody Wilson-Raybould and Chrystia Freeland. Nobody wants to know that one person has to be right and another person has to be wrong between Jane Philpott or Miriam Mosef. There are always going to be a range of perspectives that we need to listen to, but ultimately diversity, as we see right here in this room, diversity only works if there is trust. And within a team, when that trust gets broken, we have to figure out how to move forward. So I appreciate the patience everyone has had while we're working through this internally. But I also know there's a lot of really big things that we need to continue to work on, and we will. Things like reconciliation, as we've moved forward in real, meaningful ways on creating proper partnerships and engaging responsibly with Indigenous peoples right across this country as we empower them to determine their path forward. We've moved forward significantly on fighting to protect our environment and grow the economy at the same time. We've moved significantly on international leadership on a broad range of things that matter both to us here in Canada and around the world. And of course, relevantly this morning, we've moved significantly and will continue to move significantly on leadership on gender equality. We know that there is always a lot more to do. We know that for everything we've done, from pay equity to a gender balanced cabinet to international development policy that is fundamentally feminist in its approach, to things like the Canada Child Benefit, to things like a national housing strategy that puts 25% of the focus on housing for women. We know there's always more to do, and it's people like you here in this room who are going to be leading us in that in the coming decades. And that's why I'm so deeply grateful to be here and so very much excited to take your questions. I want to recognize that there are people without whom we wouldn't be able to be here today altogether, specifically Rosemary Spears, the founder of Equal Voice. There have been people fighting for opportunities like this for a long time, and you will know that I will continue to remain an ally and a strong voice for the opportunities that we need as a society for you to all have as we move forward. I want to also recognize, I think the Right Honourable Kim Campbell is here. Kim, it's wonderful to see you here, and thank you for all your leadership on this issue. But with that, I'm looking forward to taking as many questions as we have time for. So, Madam Speaker, are you taking the questions, or am I picking the questions?
You are picking the questions.
Okay. So does anyone have any questions for me? Yes. You, yeah.
Okay, waited a long time for this. I know recently the House passed motion M103, I believe, to condemn Islamophobia. I kind of find it interesting that the words used were condemn when the Muslim community has had enough words. Are we doing anything to actually address this? Are white nationalist groups going to be put on terrorist watch lists? Are they going to be prevented from meeting in online spaces or from traveling internationally? Are we actually going to have consequences for people like the leader of the Conservative Party taking pictures with fake tourists?
We have seen over the past number of years far too many examples of violence in our communities, from the mosque shooting in Saint Foy a couple of years ago to the recent terror attack in Christchurch. But we've seen attacks in synagogues like in Pittsburgh. We've seen attacks in churches around the world as well. We've seen a rise of intolerance and hate around the world whether it's anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or anti-Christian rhetoric or just hateful extremism like the incel van attack that was directly misogynistic. We know that we have to be unequivocal in our condemnation of this hate and this intolerance. But we're all sick and tired of just offering thoughts and prayers to the victims and their families. We need to be very, very clear, both in the measures we're taking. We've done significant things about improving security infrastructures for places of worship across the country, which is an important measure, but is one that is quite horrible that we have to take it, that we have to think about extra security at mosques and synagogues and churches and community gatherings. We are moving forward with, in big discussions around the world, with online platforms around their responsibility to act quicker, to be much stronger on how they filter out some of the hate and intolerance there. But ultimately, because we are here in this chamber as leaders, we have to reflect on the role that each of us play in the dog whistle politics, in the comments that are amplified in certain circles, the blind eye turned to extremist or fringe elements amongst meaningful people with fears and concerns. The Yellow Vest convoy was a great example. There's a lot of really good people who are very worried about their jobs and their communities out in the prairies, particularly around oil and gas development, who have concerns around that. But their voices were co-opted by fringe elements peddling hate and intolerance, and the Conservative Party leader was not there to condemn it. We need to make sure that all politicians are held accountable for their language. We saw in the run-up to the Quebec mosque shooting a couple of years ago that there were politicians playing easy games with Islamophobia, easy games with the politics of division, that then rallied with the community for the week or two that things were so shocking, and then slipped back into that language. We need, as citizens, as other politicians, to be holding people to account for messages of hate and intolerance. We need to do a better job of that, and we need to be focused on that in a tangible way, not just with words. But thank you very much. Question? You. Yep.
I'm sure that as a parent, you know the power of making a promise to your children. So I ask of you, what about the promise that you made to Canada, about restoring a nation-to-nation agreement, about properly implementing the UN DRIP? And I ask you, what about the direct violation of the UN DRIP with the forcible removal of protesters at the Wet'suwet'en ban? How do you...
Thank you very much. This is an issue that is probably one of the most important for this government, the issue of reconciliation. In 2015, Canadians were very clear. Non-Indigenous Canadians were very clear as well as Indigenous Canadians, that we needed to make changes in the way this place operated, because Parliament in Canada has failed Indigenous peoples for decades, for generations, for centuries, with policies aimed at assimilation, marginalization, eradication, and not the kinds of partnership that were the original spirit and intent of the treaties. We have taken significant steps in trying to get Canada back on the right path. That means a whole bunch of different things, from the very tangible things like eliminating long-term boil water advisories, of which we've eliminated a little over 80 already, and we still have more to do, but we will do it by the 5-year deadline that we gave ourselves. By opening new schools, by investing in housing, by moving forward in tangible things, but it also means recognizing the challenges around governance and support and recognition of the land that we are on, like the land we are on today as traditional Algonquin territory. We need to know that that comes with weight and it comes with importance in partnership and how we move forward. So we are working on that, but what took centuries to break is not going to be simply fixed in a year or two. We know this is a long-term job that hopefully many of you, when you come back to sit in this room as members of Parliament, will continue to work on, because this is going to last a long time. But the steps we are taking are going to require new learning, require making mistakes and taking responsibility for those mistakes. And certainly in the situation around the Wet'suwet'en, the way the provincial government acted, the way the federal government has responsibility over the RCMP requires us to think very carefully about how we move forward. But I do need to highlight that this is not just an issue of Indigenous people on one side of the question and government and authority on the other side of the question. There are many Indigenous communities and Indigenous leaders that understand or that feel that resource development, that building pipelines, that partnering in economic development is an important path forward for them. There are folks within their communities who disagree. And I don't think it's up to me or anyone else outside of those communities to decide who should speak for that community. We need to work with those communities so that they are able to develop proper pathways to make sure that everyone is heard towards consensus, towards the right path forward. There are Indigenous communities in favor of resource development. There are Indigenous communities opposed to them. And we, as a government, have committed to work with all Indigenous peoples to hear their concerns, to understand the opportunities they want to build, and figure out a path forward. And it's not going to be easy, and it will require continuing to engage in thoughtful ways. But we will do it because Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians, have made it very clear that this is something that we need if we're going to be the country I know we all want to be. Question in this corner. Yes, you.
Moi, je voulais parler de...
Inaudible. Now, regarding cannabis, before it became legal, we often heard rumors that someone could get an STI just by sniffing coke. Rumors like that. We don't know the effect that cannabis can have on our neurons. So we need more education. What do you propose? Thank you for the question. It's very important to underline how much work we have to do when it comes to educating and empowering people regarding the drug crisis. Whether it be the opioid crisis, whether it be addiction problems that are all too common in marginalized communities, or whether it be also the issues with legal drugs. Yes, cannabis has been legalized, but that was done because there was a failure of public policy previously. It did not protect our youth or our communities. And we have seen that this has been a good thing that has demarginalized and decriminalized part of the population, while creating greater security for others and for our communities. However, there is always more work to do and more information to share, more research that needs to be done to understand the impacts. I often hear about the crystal meth crisis from people in Winnipeg and about the opioid crisis throughout the country. We need more partnerships with provinces and territories, with municipalities, with civil society organizations. We need to base our policy on data, such as when we created supervised injection sites. There is much more still to be done. Thank you for having raised this important issue.
For maybe one or two more questions, you in the very back.
Do I need a mic or can you hear me?
No, you got the...
This? Okay, cool. Hi, Gwe Ninda Luisi Hannah Godlin Maltai, Delewi Mi'kmaq. Hi, my name is Hannah Martin, and I'm a Mi'kmaq woman from the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. You were just visiting our territory, I think, last week, talking to our grandmothers, who asked you to respect our traditional treaty rights and our inherent rights as Mi'kmaq people, as currently Alton Gas is trying to forcibly remove us from our traditional lands and territories on the Sebeganegedig River. And that is violating the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations announced at the United Nations Permanent Forum in 2016 that your government would fully support without qualification. I was at the Permanent Forum last year. I'll be attending next month as well to continue to lobby for our rights. And so I stand here to not only declare sovereignty as a Mi'kmaq nation, which we are, under the Peace and Friendship treaties, but I'm here to condemn the behavior of the Canadian government, who continues to oppress our people and to oppress our grandmothers who are on the river, living according to our traditional ways of life as Mi'kmaq people. I also want to stand here to deliver a message on behalf of a group that I'm a part of called Breaking the Silence. Breaking the Silence has a hub in Tatamagouche, my hometown, and has been tirelessly advocating for the ombudsperson who your government promised over a year ago. I've seen with my own eyes the destruction and the violence that Canadian mining companies have had in our sisters and brothers and relatives' traditional territories in places like Guatemala, specifically Goldcorp and the Marlin mine in San Miguel. I've spoken to our Indigenous grandmothers there in their homes, and this case has yet to be dealt with because of the lack of urgency that your government is showing to these people. And so when I hear the leader, yourself, speak about being a feminist, to me, you cannot be a feminist if you are raping the land. If you are allowing corporations to rape the land, because as Indigenous peoples, that is our mother. That is not a myth, that is not a legend, that is not a belief, that is fact, that is truth to us. She is our mother. And so when you are allowing corporations to rape the land, you are allowing the continued violence against us, the Indigenous women who are protecting a sovereign nation, sovereign nations from coast to coast to coast. We belong to sovereign nations, and the Canadian government needs to respect that. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say about these points, and I would like to call on the government to implement the ombudsperson as soon as possible and to stop violence globally on behalf of the Canadian state. Thank you, Bulalin.
Thank you very much for the strength of your words and your tireless advocacy on behalf not just of our earth, but of our grandmothers and Indigenous peoples. This is something that needs strong voices, and I really thank you for raising it directly here. These are important issues. On the issue regarding the power issue and the river, this is one that I know there have been a range of voices. I spoke with the grandmother last week, and she highlighted her disagreement with the local chiefs. as a government, once again, we have to try and do a good job, not just of listening to the chiefs, but listening to the whole community. But at the same time, we do have to figure out how to engage meaningfully with entire communities. And one of the things that we've seen throughout the work that we're trying to do in building a new relationship is the more we listen to a broad range of peoples and voices, the less likely it is that we achieve unanimity on any given issue. We need to get to consensus. We need to try and understand all the concerns and the issues brought forward, but we need to do that in a way that actually does allow us to move forward. What that forward looks like, in some cases we'll be moving forward with a project, in other cases we'll be not moving forward with a project. But our capacity to do that requires on us to actually give weight to a range of voices. But as we respect the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, has to understand as well that no one person, or in any cases one community, necessarily has a veto. We have to respect and listen to a broad range of voices. And that's part of the challenge of governing, is making those balances, making those difficult choices when there's all sorts of competing interests. And the way to do that is to listen to and gather to as much diversity as you possibly can. On the issue of the ombudsperson, we are moving forward with that. The reputation and the conduct of Canadian mining companies right around the world and at home is one that a lot of Canadians are preoccupied by, and I know the industry itself is aware that it cannot simply continue to behave as it did in the past. The world is changing, and we see that all the time. It used to be when a government decides to build a railroad, as we did across the country, nobody consulted the local peoples. The government just decided, this is it, this is where it's going. Now, that is no longer the way things are done. We still need to get railroads and their equivalents today built, but it has to be done in the right way. And that means consultation. That means working with each other. That means listening to each other. It means taking criticism, understanding it, and acting on it as best we possibly can. But it does not mean we're ever going to get to a place where everybody in this room is going to agree on the best path forward, or indeed everybody in Canada is going to agree on the best path forward. And the way I have been choosing to lead, and the way our government has been focusing on, is trying to bring in all sorts of competing voices. That's why at the same time as we're bringing in a price on pollution right across the country that really upsets one side of the house, we are moving forward on building pipelines the right way that really upsets other parts of the house. So you have to make choices in government, and sometimes they're very difficult choices, but you have to do it in a way that is getting to what is ultimately right. And that is something you do by folding back on your core values and by making sure you are listening to and empowering as many diverse voices as you possibly can. And that is exactly why this occasion, for us as leaders to hear directly from all of you, from right across the country, representing different backgrounds, diverse perspectives, but all of you, daughters of the vote, you demonstrate the way we need to continue to reflect on the better world we need to build together, and do it not in ways that are simple or easy, but ways that are complicated and difficult. Because doing the right thing, doing good things, is always going to be hard. And it's easy sometimes to take a position and stand on it, cross your arms and say, this is it. You know, my second favorite Prime Minister, Wilfrid Laurier, made a good point at one point around compromise. Because he was from a Catholic community in a time where Quebec was all about its own things and not listening to Protestant, the rest of Canada or Ontario specifically. And he said, you know, if we all stay in our solitudes, if we all stay in our firm position that we are right and nobody else is right, then there's no movement. And it's actually easy to cross your arms and stand in a place and say, I'm not budging from my position because I'm right. What is actually more difficult is to look for thoughtful compromise. is to look for a way to move forward as people who have very different perspectives, sometimes on very important issues. And that is the work that we must do in this place, and that is the work we must do across the country. Not close our ears and our hearts to each other, but actually listen to the arguments, leave space in your heart and your thoughts for the fact that someone who disagrees with you might have a good point, might be right about something. And in order to do that, you need to actually welcome in those range of voices and listen to that. And that is what we are going to continue to do. Unfortunately, I've been told I had to finish before past, and we are after past. But thank you so much for being here right now. Merci beaucoup à vous tous et toutes.
I'd like to thank all of you. I'd like to thank you for your leadership, and I'd like to thank you for everything you're going to do in the years to come to make Canada an even better place. Thank you.
Jeff?
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup aux délégués qui ont fait les...
I'd like to thank all the delegates who made statements today.
For Halifax West, the honourable member for Simcoe North, who acted as speaker and deputy speaker as well. J'invite aussi les délégués de Nipissing.
I'd like to also invite the members for Nipissing to Miskamang and for Manitoula to come to the speaker's chair.
For Nipissing to Miskamang, and Algoma, Manitoula, and Kapuskasing come up to the speaker's chair. Before I go on, I want to say how nice it is to hear a baby in the chamber. And you may know that over the past 5 or 6 or 7 years, there have been a number of times when, in fact, we have had babies in the chamber, and I think it's a wonderful thing. To exit the chamber, please go through the doors at the front or the north side. You can take the stairs and the elevators down to the committee rooms. Staff of the House of Commons are on hand to guide you to the right rooms, and I have the numbers of those rooms here. I did have them. What happened to those notes? I think it's room 35 and 25, 35B and 25B. It'll say 35, it's 035B and 025B. Say 035.
035B and 025B.
And
2 floor staff.
Staff are on hand outside to guide you there for a reception. So great to have you here. Merci beaucoup d'être là. Je vous félicite.